I'm Linda Garcia Merchant. I am a documentary filmmaker. I have my own film production company, Voces Primeras. Let's see, I grew up on the west side of Chicago, West Garfield, in the 60s, which was a very interesting time to grow up in West Garfield because it was not only the time of the blizzards, it was the time of the riots. And so I went to a Catholic school, St. Mel, for a little while, for a couple of years. And it was interesting going to school in the middle of the blizzard, or actually going to the A&P with the sled. Me and my mom took a sled to the A&P. I was 7, and went to go get groceries because we needed milk and bread and stuff, and nobody could leave the house because we had 2 feet of snow. But we only missed 1 day of school. That was the thing about growing up in Chicago. No matter how bad it snowed, you very rarely missed school. So even though we had 2 feet of snow, there was only 1 day where we missed school. But we all had to walk. My cousins lived on the 2nd floor, and we lived on the first. I mean, I lived on the 2nd floor. My cousins lived on the 1st floor, and we had to walk in all that snow. So there was eight of us total, in our little Catholic school uniforms and boots and coats and books and everything, trudging a mile to school in 2 feet of snow because our granddad would drive us, since we all actually fit in the Galaxie 500 then. Because of course this is before car seats or any of that kind of stuff, right? And sort of before seat belts being required. So if you can imagine 8 kids in the car with my granddad driving us to school. But we had to walk, so we had to get up even earlier. So school is always, growing up in Chicago, school was always a challenge because you very rarely had the day off if you went to Catholic school, and I always went to Catholic school. So in high school, one of the things we lived in West Garfield, but I went to high school in Little Village because I was going to high school. I was going to a Catholic school. I was not going to a public school because I was not coming home on drugs or pregnant. That was how my mother always described public school. And the only public school I could actually go to was Marshall, so I really wasn't going to public school. So I went to St. Casimir, and St. Casimir was a very interesting experience in the 70s because, of course, my mother is an activist and a feminist, and St. Casimir was still teaching out of the 1958 edition of the Baltimore Catechism. And so everything was blessed and ignorant, or, you just did not ask. And, of course, being a very inquisitive person, I had to ask about everything, why Adam and Eve got thrown out of the Garden of Eden, why Jesus was white, why, and so the nuns really struggled with me and that very inquisitive nature of mine. But the other thing about St. Casimir, which was really, because St. Casimir is actually located on Cermak and Albany, on the corner, so it's 22nd and Albany. So it's near Harrison High School and very near the jail. And so, 26th in California. And so, my mom was involved in politics, and so she had an office at 26th and Central Park. So I would walk there after school with my friends. And if you walked past the jail, of course, the prisoners would all, catcall and stuff, but you would also see wives of the prisoners outside talking to their husbands, when they still allowed this, from, like across the street. So they'd be out there having whole conversations, like, how's the kids, and can you bring me, smokes and stuff like that. And you'd see these women every day out there talking to them. Sometimes they'd have the kids with them. So it's kind of like visiting without visiting, when you couldn't take the kids to visit. That's one of my best recollections of 26th Street. The other thing about growing up having that experience in Little Village was, because you were in high school, you could read all the gang signs and all the graffiti. You understood it. You knew the language. So it's kind of like, it's probably the first Facebook, right? Because any information about the community or what was going on for kids in the community, like who got shot and who got beat up and what gang was fighting with what other gang, was on the wall somewhere, written in spray paint or painted or something in the neighborhood. So, and you only knew how to read it if you lived in Little Village. So those are my biggest memories of Little, oh, and Goldblatt's. Goldblatt's and Zemsky Brothers. Goldblatt's had really good cheesecake, and all of my girlfriends who had part-time jobs after school either worked at Zemsky's, Goldblatt's, or Zare. Yes, Zare. Yes. But that was the thing about the neighborhoods. People never left the neighborhoods because they didn't have to. When you had high school, once you graduated from high school, most people went on to jobs in the neighborhood in small manufacturing. And there was a significant Polish population. This is the other thing about Little Village that I do remember. It was during the transition from Polish to Mexican. And so there was this big controversy about Spanish Mass at St. Casimir. And Mass was always in English, and the population of Mexicans was increasing rapidly. And so there was a push to get Mass in Spanish. And the problem was all the priests were Polish, so none of them spoke Spanish. Mm. And so it wasn't just that Mass couldn't be offered in Spanish because they didn't, they weren't ready to do that psychologically. The school wasn't, but they physically couldn't do it because nobody spoke Spanish. So one of the priests took some courses and got fluent enough to offer the Mass in Spanish. And that was so, here you have an entire congregation of fluent people in a language having to sit through this painful this painful presentation of their language by a well-meaning priest, but still, and of course he always skipped the sermon. He would just, read the scripture and then move right into the next part of Mass. That was always the funniest thing to me, because he was fluent enough to be able to speak the words of the written words of the Mass, but not to speak to the gospel. So I thought it was very telling about, that he wanted to do this, but he couldn't, Mm-hmm. I think that was my first introduction into how dividing language could be for culture, where it could be, where it could really become this prohibitive experience. Because the only person that could give the word was someone who couldn't, and so, but I also have my issues with Catholicism, and that kneeling and standing and that rote, and the fact that it was there weren't any cool girl saints, except Mary, who was completely unattainable because you wake up one day and you're pregnant and nothing happened, what? I just didn't buy it, right? It was a lot. I like I said, I really struggled. But I have to say, the one thing that happened to me at St. Casimir that really helped me graduate from high school was Sister Andrew. And Sister Andrew was the librarian. And she had a PhD in psychology. And she was kind of like the nutty professor. The girls would always tease her and stuff. Because St. Casimir was the kind of place where you graduated, got married, and your husband got a job at the factory. And that was pretty much it, right? It got better, and more girls did go to college, but that wasn't the plan. And I knew that was not my plan. I was going to college, right? And so I was very disruptive in English class because I was bored and difficult and challenging, and spent a lot of time in the principal's office, Sister Antonine, sorry. And so she decided that in order to keep me from getting kicked out of school, she would stick me in the library and I would be tutored during English class. And so first day I go to the library, Sister Andrew's in there dusting, right? And she says, I come in and I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm just told, okay, you're going to go to the library instead of going to English class, and you're going to stay there for an hour. And you're going to spend it with Sister Andrew. So I go up there, and Sister Andrew's in there dusting. She got a little apron on, right? She doesn't want to get dirty because the books are all really dusty, and she's got her feather duster. And she says, "Oh, Linda Garcia." She goes, "Sit here." And so I came and sat at one of the tables and I put my books down and stuff. And she went over to the science fiction section of the library, pulled a book out, came back to me and put the book in front of me on the table. And she said, and it was Stranger in a Strange Land. Heinlein, right? And she goes, read this and then we'll talk about it. And we spent the rest of that year of school, it was my sophomore year, reading books and talking about them, and I'd have to write papers. And it was the first time since I was a kid where education really was, again, this organic experience for me, that I was learning about grammar and the ability to, write composition and think about the things that I was reading and apply them to my own life. And it was great. I mean, we could read, after a while it was like, well, what do you want to read, And so I could just pick things off. And we read Our Bodies Ourselves, which is the book about, women and women, and it was really, and it was nothing that I would have, we would have ever done in English class, And that was no criticism of the English teacher, but, there's 30 girls in the class, and they're all learning at a specific rate, and I'm just kind of sitting there, looking out the window, right? Or being argumentative or being a class clown or something. So, and that's really very hard on your psyche to be relatively well read at that age and articulate and not have anywhere to go with it. So Sister Antoinine must have realized that, which is why she stuck me with Sister Andrew. So the great part about that story is, this is like 30 years later, right? About 25 years later. And I go to a mass at St. Mary's in Bucktown, which is like down the street from my house, right? And because a friend of mine sings in the choir. And I hear the second guy. Sister Andrew had a lisp, a very bad lisp. And which was something else the girls would always tease her about. And they all thought she had mental issues. But it really was, because she would talk to herself. But it really was that she was this brilliant woman that had no avenue for it, right? And she was a nun, so she really had no avenue for it that wasn't already predefined, right? And so, like I said, they would call her the nutty professor and stuff like that, because she was always talking to herself, which I get now, that talking to yourself thing. So I hear the gospel reading and I look up because I hear the lisp, and I'm like, and I look up, and I was sitting pretty far back, so I couldn't quite tell, and I look, and I'm listening, I was like, that has got to be Sister Andrew. So after Mass, I go to the front to, and because she's milling around in the front, and I see her, and she sees me, and she goes, Linda Garcia, and I was like, oh my God, you remember? And she says, well, how the heck are you? And I told her about what I was doing, and I don't even know what I was doing at the time. And, I think I just moved back from Atlanta because I was working on the Olympics, and I just moved back from Atlanta, so I was telling her all that about it. And she goes, I always knew you'd do okay with your life. So yeah, so that's my little village story.
Thank you.
You're welcome.